A while ago, and I do mean a while ago, I asked you guys if you think Tacticooler is overall good or bad for the game, and this is your results. While the majority seem to think it is positive for the game, it's not that overwhelming of one. So I want to talk about it a little bit. Is this actually a special that is good for the game or bad? What are all the things it does right and wrong? And I'm looking to break it all down, and I'll come to my consensus at the end, and be sure to let me know if you agree in the comments down below. Subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started. Let's start by going through all the positive attributes of Tacticooler. First off, I don't think it does really anything to hurt a weapon's viability. If anything, it helps it. Cooler has enabled weapons that have RNG problems or speed issues to be able to keep up and be more effective, very rarely actually hurting anything. The only weapons that tend to get debated are things like Tetradulies that played really fast with a quick respawn playstyle, but in my opinion, I think that weapon's problem is more to do with its kit, and if it had one, would be fine in a Tacticooler meta, especially considering it would benefit from the special saver. Most of this is due to the intensify action on Tacticooler, helping things like Splatlings, high RNG shooters like 52 Gal, or Blasters for instance. But I think as a whole, it very clearly affects more weapons positively than not. Number 2, a nerf to sharking. One thing that I think is really important in Splatoon 3 is a balance between stealth and location tools. It isn't something talked about too much because, well, outside of Splatoon 1 when Echolocator and Cold-Blooded were really overtuned, like near the start of the game, it just hasn't really been a prominent point of discussion. But I think it is really important that there's a healthy balance between playstyles that involve hiding a lot and the ability to detect those playstyles, to where both sides have an even chance in important dynamics. And I think Cooler is a very fair way to nerf sharking. It is still possible to hide and play stealthy with the Cooler, but it is a lot more limited with the arrows giving away your location more consistently. This is something Ink Armor did as well, but compared to Ink Armor, Tacticooler's much longer duration makes this much more of an actual problem, as well as not giving you armor, which kinda makes up for the fact that they can't see you anyway. It also doesn't take away the value of other location tools, of things like Point Sensor for instance, which are still able to have a visible, better effect than someone just being tagged by their own Cooler arrows. And it also doesn't completely invalidate options like Ninja Squid. While it does definitely nerf them, which I think is kind of fair, Ninja Squid is still active and helpful when the Cooler arrows aren't there, which is still going to be the majority of the game. Number 3, the special encourages fighting and interaction. Space taking in Splatoon 3 is really important. It's something I covered in more detail in my competitive Splatoon 3 review, and I think Tacticooler is a special that really forces you to do that. Think about it. If you're not actually taking fights or walking in with your Tacticooler, what's the special really doing? It doesn't give you your special faster, or allow you to spam your sub faster, or paint better. All of the buffs it gives specifically help you in terms of being able to fight. So it's a special that directly incentivizes people to approach each other, and I think that's really important, especially in a series that has had a lot, and I mean a lot of specials that encourage the exact opposite. Number 4, it has a massive weakness that does allow for sizable counterplay, mainly forcing everyone in one area. Now I will say that this could be a little bit better, and we'll talk about it more when it comes to the special's absurd duration, but for the time being I do think it's cool that the special forces people to go into a specific area to be able to pick up a drink. Clumping up that much is not something you want to do, and throwing down a special that tells the enemy team that all 4 players want to move to this location definitely gives a lot of opportunities for opponents to do something about it. And I think it's a huge attribute to counterplay. It's so balanced in fact that my hot take here is I think even if armor lasted as long as Tacticooler did, if you had to grab it from a specific location rather than chaining to everybody, it would honestly be a weaker special than it is currently in Splatoon 2. I think it's that important a downside. Next up, I think Tacticooler provides an important check to high power specials. So something Splatoon 3 has trended towards is, well, having more impactful specials than Splatoon 2. There are things that have a lot more impact of a game, and mainly specials that result in getting kills a lot more than others. And so I think Tacticooler provides an important counter to that, in terms of allowing those kills to be less valuable. It's not that those kills lose their impact, and part of balancing Cooler is making sure they still have enough impact, but having a special to where randomly dying to a Zuka doesn't lose you the entire retake is really important. Games like Splatoon 2 had a problem with that, where if someone died early on retake, it was a huge deal. And Splatoon 3 could suffer from that problem a lot worse if it didn't have a way of dealing with it, and Cooler serves as one of those ways. Next up, Frontline diversity. It's pretty easy to connect the dots that Cooler being as good as it does is part of why there are so many different viable Frontlines in the game right now that are used in team compositions. Obviously this isn't as good as when Cooler meta started, but I mean even now, months and months and months later, it's very clear that Cooler does enable a lot of Frontline weapons specifically, which means I think it's been a big part in ensuring there's a decent bit of weapon diversity in that role, which is really important when your other 2 roles are not doing so good right now. So that's the positives. Let's talk about the negatives. First one is a problem that Ink Armor also had. It basically forces teams at a top competitive level to be having one person constantly running the special. No matter what you do, it doesn't feel like you have 4 specials to pick from, it feels like you have 3 specials to pick from, and one guy has to pick Tacticooler, which isn't on that many weapons either. Currently, there are 7 Tacticooler weapons in the game, meaning that one of your weapons has to be one of these 7. And that's still being pretty generous to say that all 7 are equal, which they absolutely aren't. But my point is more, even if they were, having it so that your comp has to have one of these weapons is unfortunate. I think we really do need a lot more cooler weapons in the game. Number 2, I think it hurts all of the modes that aren't zones. I think Rainmaker and Clams have other problems, but think about it. Clam Blitz Cheese would be nowhere near as strong without the instant quick super jump, respawn, and special saver. Rainmaker would probably be far more controlled, even if that mode still has a lot of problems, and tower control would be a bit less snowball heavy at times. Though I will say, at least in this case, it is clear that Tacticooler not being another special that can continue wiping the other team out might help at sometimes. Though I think that part of it is a bit outvoted by the fact that the Tacticooler team can just cycle coolers faster than the other one because of how tower special advantage works. The full special saver the special has means that there is really no need to live with key specials for potential lost team fights, and I think this is a bit negative of an effect. Whether it's killing a Zuka guy and then it doesn't matter because he just gets an entire other special back, or getting key kills that don't feel as impactful because the enemy team just respawns and uses their own specials to get back in. The special saver is a clearly overtuned part of this special that I think has more negative impacts than it does positive. Next up is limited counterplay. I got to praise the stand earlier for being pretty important in that regard, but let's talk about the downsides to it now. It lasts 13 seconds and is pretty much impossible to break. If the stand had a lower duration or was possible to break early, I think it would feel a lot more fair. But even though it forces the enemy team to clump up, 13 seconds with a stand that you never have to worry about going away early is just a lot of wiggle room for the team working with it. Perhaps a little bit too much, honestly. Next up, the duration of the special. So the stand itself lasts 13 seconds, and the special itself can last between 17 and 25 seconds. If we take into account the amount of special power-up that's typical for competitive play, then we have a stand that lasts 13 seconds, in which anytime after you grab that you have a drink that lasts between 19 and 21 seconds. That is an absolutely ridiculous duration. In fact, it's the most in the entire series. Even something like Bubble Blower, which I've criticized for this as well, isn't as long as this special is. And that can mean that waiting out Tacticooler isn't really an option, for better or for worse. Regardless, while I think the duration of the buffs can make a lot of sense since I don't want the counterplay to just be wait out the cooler, the stand on the other hand is just completely inexcusable to me. Another negative attribute, I think it feels much less fun / impactful compared to other support specials. Think about the amount of playmaking potential you have with an Ink Vac, for example, between trying to block for your teammates to the shot afterward. The only dip with Cooler is make sure you throw it in a cool spot, which some of them do exist, particularly things that allow players on different height elevations to be able to grab it, but like, come on, there just isn't a whole lot here. Another negative is I think it has resulted in playstyles being a little bit more similar. It has increased weapon diversity for the most part, but in terms of how people play the game, I feel like it's more similar. Everyone kind of just has to run forward and take space with Tacticooler. And while of course that playstyle is pretty healthy, I think it being the only one to this degree is a bit harsh. The only real arguments I have for this is, would that be better if there were more kit options in the game? Would those enable more different ways of playing with Cooler? Which the answer is possible, but I think Cooler is always going to be somewhat of a limiting factor. So what's my thoughts? I think with the issues that Splatoon 3 has in terms of maps and weaker kits, it kind of needs a crutch like this. And that's what I think Cooler is. It's a crutch. It lessens a lot of the issues that come from other core problems of the game, which I think can even be better balanced around if the negative attributes of Cooler were changed, such as reducing the special saver amount or the duration of the stand. But for the most part, I think it's still positive. It's had more good effects on the game than bad, and again, I just don't see problems like the map design being fixed entirely with how late we are into the game. The real question for me becomes, is Cooler something we want in Splatoon 4? I did talk a little bit about this when I did my 10 specials returning in Splatoon 3 video concept, in which I talked about what if Tacticooler could be reworked into a different mechanic so it didn't function as a special, something that would remove a lot of its problems. And well, I still want to come up with a solution like this, so if you want to see that in a future video, let me know in the comments below, and let me know what you want to see from Tacticooler in the future. I'll see you all next time.